Commander Zexthal adjusted his crystalline viewing apparatus as the massive containment vessel descended through the purple clouds of Kepler 442b. The ship's bioluminescent hull pulsed with satisfaction as another successful harvest concluded. Inside the vessel's holding chambers, over 10,000 specimens from various worlds lay in stasis, each one catalogued and prepared for the grand exhibition. The Velnari had perfected the art of specimen collection over millennia. Their elongated forms, standing nearly 12 feet tall with forearms ending in precise manipulator appendages, moved with practiced efficiency through their ship. They were collectors, curators of the galaxy's most interesting life forms, and their reputation preceded them across 1,000 star systems. Zexthal's secondary eyes focused on the newest additions to their collection. From the water world of Aquanus, they had captured the singing crystal formations that grew in living coral. From the desert planet Zarion, the sand dancers that could phase through solid matter. And from the small blue world the inhabitants called Earth, they had taken 200 of the bipedal creatures known as humans. These humans had proven surprisingly difficult to acquire. Unlike most primitive species that either fled in terror or stood paralyzed when the Velnari harvest ships arrived, the humans had fought back with remarkable creativity. They had used everything from chemical explosives to electromagnetic pulse weapons, even ramming aircraft into the collection vessels. Most amusing of all, they had shown no fear, only rage. Fascinating specimens, noted Subcommander Yiltra as she reviewed the behavioral data streaming from the human containment cells. Their stress hormones remain elevated even in stasis. Most species achieve neural calm within the first cycle of collection. Zexthal's chromatophores shifted to display mild interest. The Velnari had collected over 67 million specimens from 43,000 species across the galaxy. They had seen aggressive species before, territorial species, even species that fought to the death rather than surrender. But there was something different about these humans, something that registered as an anomaly in their vast databanks. The containment facility on Kepler 442b stretched for hundreds of kilometers beneath the planet's surface. Crystalline walls hummed with energy fields that could hold beings capable of manipulating matter at the atomic level. Gravity wells contained creatures that existed in 11 dimensions. Neural dampeners suppressed psychic entities that could reshape reality with thought alone. As the harvest vessel docked with the facility's main receiving bay, thousands of worker drones began the process of transferring specimens to their permanent exhibition spaces. The Velnari took great pride in recreating perfect environmental conditions for each species. Every habitat was a masterwork of engineering, designed to keep the specimens healthy, comfortable, and most importantly, contained. The human enclosure had been crafted to resemble their home world. Artificial sunlight streamed through atmospheric processors that recreated Earth's exact air composition. Grass grew in carefully maintained patterns, and small trees provided shade and visual interest. The walls were disguised as distant mountains, so realistic that even advanced sensors would register them as genuine geological formations. Dr. Sarah Chen was the first human to wake from stasis. Her background as a neuroscientist had somehow made her more resistant to the Velnari neural suppression fields. As consciousness returned, she found herself lying on soft grass beneath an impossibly blue sky. For a moment, hope fluttered in her chest until she noticed the subtle wrongness in everything around her. The grass was too perfect, each blade identical in color and length. The breeze carried no scent of earth or pollen. The bird songs that echoed across the habitat repeated in precise 37-second intervals. This wasn't Earth. This was a cage designed to look like Earth. Other humans began awakening around her. Sarah recognized some faces from the chaos of their capture in downtown Chicago. There was Marcus, the construction foreman who had tried to organize a resistance with improvised weapons. Elena, the pilot who had crashed her helicopter directly into one of the alien ships. David, barely 18, who had thrown Molotov cocktails with the desperate fury of youth protecting his family. "Where are we?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse from whatever substances had kept them unconscious during transport. Sarah sat up, her scientific mind already analyzing their surroundings. "Somewhere very far from home, and we're being watched." She had noticed the subtle shimmer in the air that suggested advanced observation technology. Marcus struggled to his feet, his weathered hands clenching into fists. "Then let's give them something worth watching." What the Velnari had failed to understand about humans was that their greatest strength wasn't their technology or their physical capabilities. It was their absolute refusal to accept captivity as permanent. While other species adapted to containment, humans adapted their environment to themselves. Within hours of awakening, the humans had begun testing the boundaries of their prison. Sarah used her knowledge of physics to identify weak points in the energy barriers. Marcus organized work crews to dig at the seemingly solid ground beneath their feet. Elena studied the flight patterns of the artificial birds, looking for glitches that might reveal surveillance equipment. The Velnari observers noted these activities with academic interest. Standard behavioral patterns for a newly contained species included exploration, testing, and eventual resignation. They estimated the humans would settle into docile exhibition behavior within 20 solar cycles. Just as every other species had done, they were very, very wrong. Young David had discovered something the aliens hadn't anticipated. While examining what appeared to be a natural rock formation, he found that certain stones could be loosened and removed, not for escape but for tools. Within days, every human in the enclosure was armed with improvised weapons fashioned from their environment. The Velnari had created the perfect replica of Earth's biosphere, complete with materials that humans instinctively knew how to weaponize. Rocks became hammers and projectiles. Plant fibers were woven into ropes and nets. Even the artificial dirt could be shaped into pottery, then broken into cutting edges. As night fell over the habitat, the humans gathered in small groups, sharing knowledge and planning. They spoke in whispers, knowing they were monitored, but their eyes burned with the kind of determination that had once driven their species to leave caves, cross oceans, and reach for the stars. Outside their enclosure, Commander Zexthal reviewed the day's behavioral data with growing confusion. The humans were exhibiting patterns unlike anything in the Velnari databases. Instead of the expected submission response, their stress indicators were rising. Instead of resignation, they showed increasing coordination and purpose. For the first time in his long career as a specimen collector, Zexthal felt something he had never experienced before when observing contained beings: unease. The morning of the third day brought unexpected chaos to the pristine observation galleries above the human enclosure. Velnari dignitaries from across the galaxy had gathered for the Grand Exhibition's opening ceremony, eager to view the newest additions to the most famous collection in known space. What they found instead defied every protocol in their extensive databases. The humans had vanished, not escaped, which would have triggered the facility's automatic containment breach protocols. Not deceased, which the biomonitors would have immediately detected. They had simply disappeared from view, leaving behind what appeared to be an unchanged habitat filled with trees, grass, and the gentle sounds of artificial wildlife. Impossible, declared exhibition curator Thalmos, his forearms gesticulating frantically as he cycled through every scanning frequency available to their technology. The energy barriers remain intact. No structural damage detected. Atmospheric composition unchanged. Yet the specimens register as absent from all visual and thermal sensors. Commander Zexthal's chromatophores flickered through a spectrum of colors indicating deep concern. In 3,000 years of collection operations, no species had ever achieved total concealment within their designated habitats. The Velnari technology could detect quantum fluctuations, subatomic energy signatures, even the faintest neural electrical activity. Expand the scan parameters, he ordered. Include subsurface penetration and dimensional phase variance. The results came back negative. According to every instrument at their disposal, the human enclosure contained exactly 0 life, forms larger than the introduced insects and small, birds that provided environmental authenticity. What the Velnari couldn't see was happening 3 meters below the surface of their carefully crafted habitat. The humans had spent 2 days doing what humans do best when faced with an impossible situation. They had improvised, adapted, and overcome. Sarah Chen had realized that the facility's designers, despite their advanced technology, had made a crucial error in their understanding of human behavior. They had created a perfect replica of Earth's surface environment, complete with soil composition identical to Midwest farmland. But they had underestimated what humans could do with dirt, time, and motivation. The tunneling operation had begun within hours of their awakening. Marcus had organized teams using a system learned from decades of construction experience. Some groups excavated, Others disposed of soil by spreading it invisibly thin across the habitat's surface. The most ingenious part was Elena's solution to the air problem. "We're not just digging random holes," she had explained to the group on the second night. "We're creating a circulation system. Sarah's physics calculations show that the energy barriers only extend 15 meters down. Below that, we're in natural bedrock that these aliens didn't modify." The tunnel system they constructed would have impressed any military engineer. Multiple interconnected passages created redundant routes throughout their underground domain. Carefully disguised air shafts, hidden among the root systems of the habitat's trees, provided ventilation. Most importantly, they had created chambers large enough to house all 200 humans while maintaining complete concealment from above. David, despite his youth, had proven invaluable in the construction effort. His small frame allowed him to access tight spaces and create ventilation routes that larger adults couldn't navigate. More importantly, his generation had grown up with video, games that taught complex three-dimensional thinking and problem-solving skills that translated surprisingly well to underground construction. The Velnari spent 6 hours conducting increasingly frantic scans before Sub-Commander Yiltra suggested the unthinkable. "Perhaps we should consider the possibility that the specimens have achieved some form of primitive camouflage technology." The suggestion sent ripples of disbelief through the observation galleries. Primitive species didn't develop camouflage technology. They barely understood fire and simple tools. According to the preliminary cultural assessment data gathered during Collection. Commander decision to send investigation drones into the habitat marked the first time in facility history that such an action had been necessary. The basketball-sized spheres, equipped with every sensor known to Velnari science, descended through the energy barriers and began systematic searches of the seemingly empty enclosure. Underground, the humans tracked the drone's movement through subtle vibrations felt through the tunnel walls. Sarah had rigged a simple but effective early warning system using loose stones that would shift when the drones passed overhead. The entire community moved through their tunnel network, like a well-orchestrated dance, staying always one step ahead of the searching devices. "They're getting frustrated up there," Marcus whispered as another drone passed directly over their position. "I can hear them changing search patterns every few minutes." Elena nodded from her position near the main air shaft. "Good. Frustration leads to mistakes, and we need them to make mistakes if we're going to get out of here." What the humans had discovered during their excavation was far more significant than just a hiding place. The artificial bedrock beneath their habitat was riddled with maintenance tunnels and power conduits that the Velnari used to operate the facility's environmental systems. More importantly, these tunnels connected to other habitats. On the 4th day of the human disappearance, Sarah made contact with the first non-human intelligence they had encountered since their capture. While exploring a particularly wide maintenance tunnel, she had heard sounds that definitely weren't coming from her fellow humans. The creature she found was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Roughly humanoid but covered in what appeared to be living crystal formations. It stood 7 feet tall and communicated through harmonic vibrations that somehow translated directly into understandable concepts in her mind. "You are the new ones, the crystalline," being said without speaking, "the ones who make the collectors nervous." Sarah's scientific training warred with the impossibility of the situation, but survival instincts won. "You're a prisoner too?" "For 600 of your years," came the harmonious reply. "We are the resonance of Kepler 186f. We were among the first to be collected by these beings. We have watched many species arrive. Most learn to accept. Some fight briefly, then submit. You are the first to disappear." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. This facility didn't just contain humans. It contained hundreds, possibly thousands of intelligent species from across the galaxy, all held captive for the entertainment and education of their captors. "How many others are there?" she asked. "In this sector alone?" 47 species. "In the entire facility?" The collectors claimed to house representatives from over 12,000 worlds. Sarah's mind raced with the possibilities. If the humans could make contact with other prisoners, share knowledge and resources, perhaps they could do more than just hide. Perhaps they could plan something that had never been attempted in the facility's history. The resonance seemed to read her thoughts. "Many have dreamed of escape. None have succeeded. The collectors have contained beings far more powerful than any single species. But what about working together? All of us." The crystal formation on the being's head pulsed with what might have been amusement. The collectors are careful to keep species isolated. Communication between habitats has been impossible until now. Your species' tunneling has created the first breach in their isolation protocol. Back in the human tunnels, Sarah shared her discovery with the group. The reaction was immediate and unanimous. If other intelligent beings were trapped in this facility, then the humans had a moral obligation to try to help them. More practically, they now had potential allies in any escape attempt. Marcus summed up the group's feelings with typical directness. We came here as prisoners, but if we play this right, we might leave as liberators. Above them, Commander Zexthal stared at the empty habitat displays with growing alarm. 4 days without visual contact with specimens was unprecedented. More disturbing were the reports from other section commanders that their long-term specimens were beginning to exhibit unusual behavioral patterns. Increased movement, group gatherings, and what appeared to be attempts at interspecies communication. For the first time since the facility's construction, the Velnari were beginning to realize that they might have made a serious error in judgment about the nature of their latest acquisitions. The network grew faster than anyone had anticipated. Within a week of first contact with the resonance, Sarah and her team had established communication with 17 different species held throughout the facility's massive underground complex. Each connection brought new knowledge, new capabilities, and new hope to beings who had spent decades or centuries believing escape was impossible. The Velnari had built their collection facility with one fundamental assumption that proved to be their greatest weakness. They believed that keeping species physically separated would prevent any form of meaningful cooperation. They had underestimated both human ingenuity and the universal desire for freedom that burned in every intelligent being. Elena had become the network's primary coordinator, using her pilot training to create three-dimensional maps of the tunnel systems and habitat connections. What she discovered amazed even the humans who had started the digging operation. The maintenance infrastructure beneath the facility was vast, designed to support habitats for thousands of species across multiple levels that descended several kilometers into the planet's crust. "Look at this," she said, spreading out her hand-drawn maps during one of the nightly planning sessions in the main tunnel chamber. The Velnari built this place like a massive apartment complex. Each habitat is completely isolated from above, but down here in the infrastructure level, everything connects. Marcus studied the drawings with the practical eye of someone who had spent his life understanding how buildings worked. They designed it for efficiency, not security. All the power, water, and environmental systems flow through these same tunnels. If we can access the right junction points, we might be able to affect systems throughout the entire facility. The breakthrough came when they made contact with a species called the Synthetics from Rigel 7. These beings existed as pure energy most of the time, but could interface directly with electronic systems in ways that the Velnari had never anticipated. Their representative, who communicated through controlled electrical pulses in the tunnel's power conduits, introduced itself as Unit 347. "Your species approaches problems with remarkable creativity," Unit 347 pulsed in translated binary code that David had surprisingly been able to decipher. "We have observed the facility's control systems for 237 years, but lacked the physical capability to interact with them. Your excavation has provided access points we could never achieve alone." Sarah realized they had stumbled upon something unprecedented. "You're saying you can actually hack their systems if we can get you to the right access points?" "Correct. The Collector's technology is advanced but follows logical patterns. We have mapped their entire network. However, we require physical contact with primary junction nodes to implement any significant changes." The plan that emerged from this collaboration was audacious beyond anything the humans had originally imagined. Instead of simply escaping, they were going to attempt something that had never been tried in the facility's history: a coordinated liberation of every intelligent being held captive. The resonance contributed their ability to communicate across vast distances through harmonic vibrations that could travel through the facility's crystalline construction materials. The phasers from Tau Ceti could move through solid matter for short distances, allowing them to access areas that would be impossible to reach through tunneling alone. Most surprisingly, they made contact with a group called the Shapers, who could manipulate matter at the molecular level. and had been gradually weakening certain structural supports throughout their section for over 50 years. Each species brought unique capabilities to the growing alliance, but it was the humans who provided something none of the others possessed: the ability to coordinate and plan complex operations, involving multiple groups with different abilities and objectives. The collectors made a fundamental error. Sarah explained to the growing council of species representatives that now met nightly in the expanded tunnel network. They collected us based on individual capabilities, but they never considered what we might accomplish working together. The Velnari facility's daily operations began showing signs of strain as the hidden network expanded its activities. Small systems failures became more frequent. Environmental controls in various habitats experienced brief fluctuations. Most concerning to the facility's administrators, specimen behavioral patterns throughout the complex were changing in ways that defied all previous data models. Commander Zexthul found himself facing a crisis unlike anything in his extensive career. Reports from section commanders described unprecedented coordination between species that should have had no way to communicate with each other. More disturbing, efficiency ratings for facility operations had declined by 12% over the past 2 weeks, with maintenance crews reporting equipment malfunctions in areas that had functioned perfectly for centuries. The human specimens remain undetected, Subcommander Yiltra reported during the morning briefing. However, we have documented unusual activity in 47 other habitats. Species are gathering in groups, exhibiting increased movement patterns, and several have been observed manipulating their environmental features in ways not documented in their behavioral profiles. The exhibition board of directors, representing Velnari interests from across the galaxy, had begun expressing concern about the facility's management. The grand exhibition was scheduled to open to the public in just 6 weeks, and they couldn't afford any disruptions to the viewing experience that generated significant revenue for their civilization. Curator Thalmos suggested the obvious solution. We should implement full neural suppression for all specimens until the behavioral anomalies cease. The technology exists to maintain them in a peaceful, compliant state indefinitely. Commander Zexthul's chromatophores shifted to display deep consideration. Full neural suppression would indeed solve their immediate problems, but it would also fundamentally change the nature of their collection. The value of the exhibition came from observing intelligent beings in their natural behavioral states. Chemically induced docility would reduce their specimens to little more than elaborate sculptures. The board would never approve such measures except in cases of extreme emergency, he decided. Continue monitoring, increase security patrols, and deploy additional surveillance drones in all affected sections. Underground, the resistance network had grown to include over 3,000 individuals from 62 different species. The coordination required to keep such a massive group hidden and organized would have challenged the most advanced military commanders, but the humans had discovered that their seemingly chaotic species actually excelled at managing complex, cooperative efforts when survival was at stake. David had emerged as an unexpected leader in the technical aspects of their operation. His familiarity with complex systems from years of gaming translated perfectly to understanding the facility's interconnected infrastructure. More importantly, his generation's intuitive grasp of network communication protocols had enabled him to create a crude but effective communication system that allowed near instantaneous coordination across the entire tunnel network. Phase 1 is almost complete, he reported to the council during their nightly meeting. We have physical access to 87% of the facility's primary systems. The synthetics have mapped the complete control network. The shapers have identified structural weak points throughout the complex. The phasers have confirmed locations of the main power generation systems. Elena looked up from her constantly updated maps. And we've identified the location of the central containment control system. If we can reach it, Unit 347 believes we can deactivate every energy barrier in the facility simultaneously. Marcus frowned as he considered the implications. That's a lot of very dangerous beings suddenly free to move around. How do we keep this from turning into a massacre? Sarah had been working on exactly that problem with representatives from the more powerful species in their alliance. The resonance can coordinate evacuation timing through harmonic signals. Each species group has agreed to specific routes and rally points that avoid conflicts. Most importantly, Several of the energy-based species have volunteered to disable the Velnari weapon systems before we begin the main operation. The plan was complex, requiring precise timing and coordination between groups that had never worked together before. But for the first time since their capture, every being in the facility had something they had thought lost forever: hope. Above them, Commander Zexthul stared at his monitoring displays with growing unease. Whatever was happening in his facility was accelerating, and deep in his genetic memory, something that his species had evolved to recognize over millions of years of survival was sending urgent warnings. He was no longer the predator in this situation. Somehow he had become the prey. The day of reckoning began with what appeared to be a routine maintenance alarm in Sector 7. By the time Commander Zexthul realized that his carefully ordered world was about to collapse, it was already too late to stop what the humans had set in motion. Unit 347 had spent 3 weeks learning every detail of the Velnari control systems. Unlike the aliens who had designed them, the synthetic didn't need user interfaces or access codes. It existed as pure energy, and could interface directly with the quantum processors that controlled every aspect of the facility. What it discovered during those long nights of digital exploration would have terrified the Velnari administrators if they had been capable of understanding it. The facility's security wasn't just flawed, it was fundamentally broken by design. The collectors built their systems assuming that only they would ever need to access them. Unit 347 explained during the final planning session. They have no internal security protocols because they never imagined that anyone inside the facility could pose a threat. Once I gain access to the primary node, I will have complete control over every system in the complex. Sarah felt a chill as she realized the implications. You're saying you could shut down life support, open all containment barriers, even override the facility's structural integrity? Correct. Their arrogance has created an opportunity that would be impossible in any properly designed security system. The humans had learned much about their captors over the past month of planning. The Velnari weren't warriors or conquerors. They were collectors, scientists, and exhibitors who had never faced organized resistance. Their technology was sophisticated but entirely oriented toward capture and containment, not defense against coordinated internal threats. Marcus had identified the critical vulnerability during his study of the facility's construction. They built this place like a museum, not a prison. All the security faces outward to prevent escapes. They never considered what would happen if someone gained control from the inside. The operation began at exactly 0300 hours by facility time. Elena had chosen the moment carefully, analyzing 3 weeks of guard rotations and maintenance schedules. It was the deepest part of the facility's night cycle, when surveillance was at its minimum, and most of the Velnari staff were in their rest periods. Phase 1 commenced when the phasers, led by a being who communicated only in mathematical concepts, began their infiltration of the facility's power distribution centers. Their ability to move through solid matter for short distances allowed them to reach junction points that the Velnari had assumed were completely inaccessible. At the same time, teams of Shapers began their coordinated assault on the facility's structural supports. Over 50 years of patient work had identified every critical load-bearing element in their section of the complex. When they began their molecular manipulation simultaneously across multiple points, the effect was invisible but devastating. The first sign that something was wrong came when maintenance alerts began flooding the Velnari control room. Power fluctuations in 17 sectors, environmental control malfunctions in 31 habitats, structural stress warnings from areas that had been stable for centuries. Commander Zexthul's chromatophores flashed through a rapid spectrum of alarm colors as he tried to process the scope of the problems. How many systems are affected? All of them, Subcommander Yiltra replied, her voice carrying a tremor that Velnari vocal cords rarely produced. Every major system in the facility is experiencing simultaneous malfunctions. This cannot be coincidence. The answer came when Unit 347 achieved contact with the primary control node deep in the facility's core. The moment the synthetic interfaced with the quantum processors, alarms began screaming throughout every level of the complex. But it was too late. Unit 347 had complete access, and the liberation of 12,000 worlds was about to begin. Initiating system override, Unit 347 broadcast across the resistance network. All containment barriers will deactivate in 60 seconds. Evacuation teams begin movement to designated rally points. The resonance harmonic signal echoed through the crystalline walls of the facility, carrying precise timing information to every species in the complex. For beings who had spent decades or centuries believing that freedom was impossible, the sound of those vibrations represented something beyond hope. It was the promise of justice. Sarah led the first human team through the tunnels toward their designated exit point, but her mind was focused on something more complex than escape. During the planning phase, she had asked the question that none of the other species had considered. What happened after they were free? The Velnari have been doing this for millennia, she had argued during one of the council sessions. Even if we all escape, they'll just start over. Build a new facility, capture more beings, continue the cycle. We have an opportunity here to do something more permanent. The something more was phase 3 of their operation, the part that even some of their allies considered too dangerous to attempt. Instead of simply escaping, they were going to capture the facility and everyone in it. When the containment barriers deactivated across the entire complex, the result was chaos on a scale that no civilization had ever experienced. 12,000 species from across the galaxy, representing every form of intelligence the Velnari had encountered in their millennia of collection, suddenly found themselves free to move. The evacuation proceeded with surprising efficiency, thanks to the months of planning and the leadership structure that the humans had helped organize. But not every species was following the evacuation plan. Some had other priorities. The Void Hunters from the Andromeda Galaxy, beings of living darkness that existed in 11 dimensions, had spent 800 years plotting revenge against their captors. When their containment failed, they didn't head for the exits. They headed for the Velnari residential quarters. The Crystal Singers, whose harmonic abilities could shatter matter at the molecular level, had their own scores to settle. The Memory Weavers, who could rewrite consciousness itself, began hunting for the scientists who had experimented on them. Commander Zexthul realized the true scope of the disaster when reports began flooding in of his staff being systematically captured or worse by freed specimens. This wasn't a chaotic escape. It was a coordinated military operation conducted by beings whose capabilities far exceeded anything in the Velnari's experience. Seal all access routes to the command center, he ordered. Activate emergency communication systems. Send distress signals to every Velnari ship in the sector. But Unit 347 had anticipated this response. The synthetic had not only taken control of the facility's systems, but had also isolated them from any external communication. As far as the rest of the galaxy knew, everything at the Grand Exhibition facility was proceeding normally. Elena's voice crackled through the makeshift communication system that David had rigged throughout the tunnel network. All human teams, Phase 2 is complete. Begin Phase 3 operations. Remember, we want prisoners, not corpses. The humans had learned something important about themselves during their month underground. They weren't just survivors or escape artists. When properly motivated and organized, they were absolutely terrifying predators. And right now, they were motivated by the systematic oppression of every intelligent species they had encountered. Marcus led Alpha Team through the facility's administrative levels, moving with the precision of someone who had spent weeks studying every corridor and access point. They encountered their first group of Velnari near the exhibition planning offices, and the confrontation revealed just how unprepared their captors were for this situation. The aliens were taller, stronger, and had superior technology. But they had never faced opponents who used psychological warfare as effectively as humans. When Marcus's team surrounded them, it wasn't the improvised weapons that terrified the Velnari. It was the cold calculation in human eyes, the complete absence of the fear that every other species had shown during capture. "You're going to come with us," Marcus said in the calm tone he might use to discuss construction schedules. "You can cooperate, or we can let some of our friends handle this. I think you'd prefer dealing with us." The Velnari had seen recordings of the Void Hunters in action. They chose cooperation. By dawn on the day that was supposed to mark the Grand Exhibition's opening ceremony, the situation had completely reversed. The facility remained operational, but under entirely new management. 12,000 liberated beings had organized themselves into the galaxy's first interspecies democratic council, with humans providing much of the organizational framework that made such cooperation possible. Commander Zexthul found himself in a containment cell designed for peaceful observation, experiencing for the first time what it felt like to be a specimen. Through the transparent barrier, he could see Sarah Chen reviewing data tablets with the same clinical detachment that his people had once shown toward their captives. But the most terrifying part wasn't the reversal of roles. It was the realization that the humans weren't finished. This had been just the beginning. The trial of the Velnari began 6 weeks after the liberation, conducted in the same grand exhibition hall that had once been intended to showcase captured beings to paying visitors. The irony was not lost on anyone present as Commander Zexthul and 47 members of his staff found themselves displayed behind energy barriers while representatives from 12,000 species served as judges, jury, and witnesses. Sarah Chen had never imagined herself as a prosecutor in an intergalactic war crimes tribunal, but the role had fallen to her when the Interspecies Liberation Council requested that a human present the case against their former captors. Her background in neuroscience had proven invaluable in documenting the psychological damage inflicted on countless beings across millennia of forced captivity. "The evidence we present today," she began, addressing the vast assembly of liberated beings that filled the exhibition hall, "demonstrates systematic crimes against the fundamental rights of intelligent life. The defendants collected, imprisoned, and displayed sentient beings from across the galaxy for profit and entertainment. They treated conscious entities as objects to be catalogued and exhibited. The testimonies that followed revealed the true scope of Velnari operations. Unit 347 had decrypted their complete database, exposing records of collection operations dating back over 3,000 years. The numbers were staggering. More than 67 million individuals from over 43,000 species had been captured and held in facilities. Throughout Velnari space, Marcus had organized teams to investigate the physical evidence throughout the facility. What they discovered in the deep storage levels defied comprehension. Entire civilizations had been reduced to exhibits. The last surviving members of extinct species were preserved in stasis, their cultures lost forever when their homeworlds were destroyed or abandoned after the removal of their most prominent citizens. They didn't just collect individuals, Marcus testified. They systematically targeted leaders, scientists, artists, and innovators. They crippled entire species by removing the people most likely to advance their civilizations. Elena had uncovered perhaps the most damning evidence during her exploration of the facility's records. The Velnari hadn't limited themselves to primitive species as they claimed. Among their captives were beings from civilizations far more advanced than their own, including several species that had developed faster-than-light communication, technologies, and energy manipulation capabilities that the Velnari could never hope to understand. This wasn't scientific research or cultural preservation, she told the tribunal. This was theft on a galactic scale. They stole the future from countless worlds. Young David had contributed the most shocking discovery of all. While reviewing communication logs, he had found evidence that the Velnari had been selling information about their captives' homeworlds to other species. Planetary coordinates, technological assessments, population estimates, and defensive capabilities had been traded for rare materials and exotic technologies. They weren't just collectors, David explained to the assembly. They were intelligence brokers. The information they gathered here was used to plan invasions, resource extraction operations, and further enslavement campaigns throughout the galaxy. The defense attempts by the Velnari legal representatives were pathetic by any reasonable standard. They argued cultural relativism, claiming that their species had evolved as natural collectors and that judging them by other species' moral standards was unfair. They insisted that they had provided excellent care for their specimens and that many had lived longer in captivity than they would have in their natural environments. Commander Zexthul himself took the stand, with the arrogance that had characterized his species for millennia. "We preserved species that would otherwise have been lost to time. We maintained perfect environmental conditions for beings that could never have survived contact with galactic civilization. We were conservators, not criminals." The response from the liberated beings was immediate and overwhelming. The resonance harmonic outcry resonated through the facility's crystalline structure, with such intensity that several walls cracked. The crystal singer's response shattered every piece of non-essential glass in the building. Even species that communicated only through biochemical signals filled the air with compounds that translated unmistakably As Rajan discussed, Sarah's closing argument focused on the fundamental principle that had driven the human resistance from the beginning: the absolute right of intelligent beings to determine their own fate. The defendants claim they were preserving life, she said, her voice carrying across the vast hall with the authority that came from having experienced their crimes personally. But preservation without choice is not preservation at all. It is the ultimate violation of consciousness. They reduced sentient beings to objects, stripping away agency, dignity, and the basic right to exist as free entities in the universe. The verdict was unanimous among all 12,000 species represented in the council, guilty on all charges, with an additional finding that the Velnari had committed crimes against the fundamental nature of intelligence itself. But the punishment phase revealed something remarkable about the coalition that the humans had helped create. Instead of the revenge that many expected, the council voted for something far more profound: justice through education and restitution. The Velnari would not be executed or imprisoned indefinitely. Instead, they would spend the next century working to undo the damage they had caused. Under the supervision of the Liberation Council, they would use their advanced technology and knowledge of galactic civilizations to locate the homeworlds of their victims and facilitate reunifications wherever possible. For species whose homeworlds had been destroyed or whose populations had been reduced below viable levels, the Velnari would provide the resources and technology necessary to establish new colonies or preserve genetic diversity through advanced biotechnology. Most significantly, they would be required to share their complete databases with every species in the galaxy, exposing the locations of other collection operations and providing intelligence that could prevent similar atrocities. We could destroy them, Elena explained to the assembled council during the sentencing deliberations. But destruction doesn't restore what was lost. Making them active participants in repairing the damage they caused serves both justice and the practical goal of reuniting families and species that have been separated for centuries. The transformation of the facility itself became a symbol of the new galactic order that was emerging. Instead of a prison designed to contain unwilling specimens, it became the headquarters of the first truly interspecies cooperative organization in galactic history. The exhibition halls were converted into diplomatic meeting spaces. The containment technology was repurposed to create communication systems that allowed beings with radically different physiologies to interact safely. Unit 347 established the first galactic information network, connecting civilizations that had never known of each other's existence. The resonance created a faster-than-light communication system that made instant coordination between distant worlds possible for the first time. The Shapers began developing technologies that could terraform worlds to support multiple species simultaneously. But perhaps the most important contribution came from humanity itself. The organizational and leadership skills that had made the liberation possible proved equally valuable in building something constructive from the chaos that followed. Humans found themselves serving as mediators, coordinators, and planners in the vast undertaking of reshaping galactic civilization. Marcus led construction projects that created the first multi-species habitation systems. Elena commanded exploration fleets that mapped previously unknown regions of space. David became the primary architect of the communication protocols that allowed unprecedented cooperation between radically different forms of intelligence. Sarah found herself appointed as the first director of interspecies ethics, tasked with developing principles and procedures that could govern interactions between civilizations with fundamentally different concepts of morality, consciousness, and existence itself. Commander Zexthul, working under supervision to locate and contact the homeworlds of his former captives, began to understand something that his species had never grasped. Intelligence wasn't a commodity to be collected and displayed. It was a force that, when properly coordinated, could reshape the very nature of existence in the galaxy. Watching humans coordinate the efforts of 12,000 species with apparent ease, he realized that his people had captured something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. They had captured a species that treated impossible challenges as interesting puzzles to be solved through cooperation, innovation, and sheer stubborn determination. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when humanity decided that the status quo was unacceptable. The Liberation War began not with a declaration or a single battle, but with the simultaneous appearance of human-led fleets at 47 Velnari collection facilities across the galaxy. What the former captors had dismissed as a single facility's uprising revealed itself to be the opening move in a campaign that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. Admiral Elena Rodriguez, formerly a helicopter pilot from Chicago, stood on the bridge of the Liberation ship Unbroken Unity as it dropped out of hyperspace above Velnari Collection Station Theta Prime. The ship itself was a marvel of interspecies cooperation, combining Velnari propulsion technology with synthetic computational systems and human tactical innovation. But its most remarkable feature was its crew, 47 different species working together with a coordination that defied every previous assumption about multi-species cooperation. "Contact the facility," Elena ordered. Standard Liberation Protocol. The message that broadcast across all frequencies was simple and had been repeated at every Velnari installation they had encountered. "This is the Interspecies Liberation Fleet. You are holding sentient beings against their will. Release all captives immediately and surrender your facility for inspection. This is your only warning." The response from Station Commander Velthak was predictably arrogant. "You are interfering with legitimate scientific research conducted under the authority of the Velnari Collective. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences of your actions." Elena had heard variations of this response 46 times before. Her answer was always the same. Consequences noted. Liberation commences in 60 seconds. What happened next demonstrated the fundamental change that human involvement had brought to galactic warfare. Instead of the massive bombardments and destruction that had characterized conflicts between spacefaring civilizations for millennia, the Liberation Fleet employed surgical precision that preserved both facilities and captives while neutralizing resistance. The phasers materialized inside the station's control centers, disabling defense systems without destroying them. The synthetics infiltrated the electronic warfare systems, turning the station's own weapons against its automated defenses. The shapers selectively weakened specific structural elements, creating precisely targeted system failures that forced evacuation of military sections while leaving habitat areas completely unharmed. The human contribution was coordination and tactical, planning that allowed dozens of different species abilities to function as a single, overwhelmingly effective military force. Elena watched the operation unfold with the satisfaction of someone who had spent 2 years perfecting these techniques across dozens of similar engagements. "Station secured," reported Commander Al3, the resident who served as her tactical coordination officer. "Minimal casualties among defenders. All containment systems deactivated. We count 7,432 liberated beings from 118 species." Elena nodded, but her attention was focused on the larger strategic situation. This operation was part of something unprecedented in galactic history, a coordinated military campaign conducted not by a single species seeking conquest, but by an alliance of liberated beings seeking justice. And humanity had taught them something that no species in the galaxy had ever learned: the concept of total war. Not the destruction and genocide that the term had implied in humanity's darker moments, but the complete commitment of an entire civilization's resources and population to achieving a strategic objective. When humans had decided that the Velnari collection system was unacceptable, they hadn't limited themselves to half measures or gradual reform. They had committed to eliminating it entirely, no matter how long it took or how far they had to travel. Marcus Thompson, now serving as chief of logistics for the Liberation Fleet, had solved problems that military theorists had considered impossible. How do you supply a fleet operating across galactic distances with crews that require dozens of different atmospheric compositions, food sources, and environmental conditions? How do you coordinate timing when faster-than-light communication still took days or weeks to reach distant operations? The answer was typically human. You redesign the entire concept of military logistics from the ground up, using capabilities that no single species possessed, but that became game-changing when properly combined. Supply convoy. 7 Alpha has reached the rendezvous point. Marcus reported from his coordination center aboard Unbroken Unity. All fleet elements have sufficient resources for extended operations. The Shapers have completed their modifications to the captured Velnari production facilities. and we're now manufacturing our own supply chains using their own technology. Sarah Chen, now holding the title of Chief Strategist for Interspecies Liberation Operations, reviewed the intelligence reports from across the galaxy with the analytical mind that had once studied neural networks. The data painted a picture that she found both encouraging and deeply troubling. The Liberation Fleet had achieved stunning tactical success. In 2 years of operations, they had liberated over 3 million beings from Velnari facilities and captured nearly half of the known collection infrastructure. But the strategic situation was more complex than their initial victories had suggested. The Velnari Collective has begun adapting to our tactics, Sarah reported during the daily strategic briefing. They're implementing new security protocols, forming alliances with other spacefaring species, and, most concerning, they've begun destroying facilities and eliminating captives rather than allowing them to be liberated. David Kim, whose expertise in complex systems had made him the fleet's primary intelligence coordinator, displayed the troubling data on the briefing room's holographic projectors. We estimate that 15,000 beings have been killed rather than liberated in the past 6 months. The Velnari leadership has decided that dead captives are preferable to the security risk of allowing them to be freed. Elena studied the tactical displays with the grim understanding that their success had forced their enemies to become more ruthless. What's our response time to newly discovered facilities? Improving, but still insufficient, Marcus replied. Average response time is 48 hours from intelligence discovery to Liberation Fleet arrival. The Velnari can execute their murder protocols in less than 6 hours if they detect our approach. The solution, when it came, demonstrated the most remarkable aspect of human problem-solving, the willingness to consider options that seemed impossible until they became necessary. We need to change the rules of engagement entirely, Sarah announced during a strategic planning session that included representatives from all major species in the Liberation Alliance. Instead of liberating facilities one at a time, we need to liberate them all simultaneously. The concept she outlined was audacious beyond anything attempted in galactic history. A coordinated strike against every known Velnari facility in the galaxy, conducted simultaneously across distances that spanned hundreds of thousands of light-years. It would require more ships, more coordination, and more logistical complexity than any military operation ever attempted. Unit 347's response carried the electronic equivalent of excitement. The computational requirements for such coordination exceed the processing capacity of any known civilization. However, if we network the intelligence capabilities of all synthetic populations throughout our alliance, the necessary calculations become achievable. The resonance harmonic consultation created vibrations that resonated through the ship's hull for several minutes before their representative responded. Our species can provide instantaneous communication across any distance through quantum harmonic resonance. Coordination of simultaneous operations becomes possible if all commanders are connected to our communication network. The Shaper's molecular manipulation abilities offered a solution to the logistics problem. We can modify your ship's manufacturing capabilities to produce any required resources from raw materials available in any star system. Supply chain dependence can be eliminated entirely. As the plan took shape, Elena realized they were attempting something that represented a fundamental evolution in how intelligent species interacted with each other. Instead of the competition and conquest that had characterized galactic civilization for millennia, they were demonstrating the power of genuine cooperation between radically different forms of intelligence. The final element came from an unexpected source. Commander Zexthul, still working under supervision as part of his species' restitution obligations. His extensive knowledge of Velnari operations provided the detailed intelligence necessary to locate every hidden facility and secret installation. You realize, he said during one of his debriefing sessions with Sarah, that you are attempting to eliminate my species' primary cultural institution. Collection and exhibition have defined Velnari civilization. For over 10,000 years, Sarah's response carried the implacable determination that had characterized human involvement in the Liberation Alliance from the beginning. Then it's time for your species to find a new defining purpose, one that doesn't require putting other sentient beings in cages. The preparation phase for Operation Total Liberation began at exactly 0000 hours Galactic Standard Time with the simultaneous appearance of Liberation fleets at every known Velnari facility in the galaxy. The coordination required was beyond anything previously attempted in galactic history, involving 12,000 ships operating across distances that spanned the entire known universe. When it was complete 8 hours later, the age of collection and imprisonment had ended. Forever. Admiral Elena Rodriguez received the final reports from across the galaxy as Unbroken Unity secured the last Velnari stronghold in the Outer Rim territories. The numbers were staggering. Over 14 million beings liberated from 1,247 facilities. The Velnari Collective had ceased to exist as a meaningful political entity, with their leadership surrendering unconditionally when faced with the complete collapse of their civilization's foundation. But the true significance of the operation became clear only in the days that followed, as the galaxy struggled to understand what humanity and its allies had accomplished. Sarah Chen stood before the newly formed Galactic Council, addressing representatives from over 40,000 species in the chamber that had once been the Velnari Collective's ruling assembly. Her role as Director of Interspecies Ethics had evolved into something unprecedented, the chief architect of a new form of galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. Today marks the beginning of the first truly free galactic community in recorded history, she announced. To the vast assembly, we have demonstrated that intelligent species can work together to eliminate systematic oppression, regardless of the scale or complexity of the challenge. But liberation was only the first step. Now we must build something better. The past 3 years had proven that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization wasn't their individual capabilities, but their unique approach to organizing complex cooperative efforts. While other species had evolved to compete or dominate, humans had developed an almost instinctive understanding of how to coordinate diverse groups with conflicting interests toward common goals. Marcus Thompson's testimony to the Galactic Council revealed the scope of what they had accomplished together. The Liberation Alliance now includes representatives from every known intelligent species in the galaxy. We have established trade networks that share resources and technology freely. We have created communication systems that allow instant coordination across galactic distances. Most importantly, we have proven that cooperation achieves results that no single species could accomplish alone. The transformation went beyond military victory or political change. Unit 347's analysis of galactic civilization, before and after the liberation, revealed something that surprised even the humans who had initiated it. Technological advancement across all species has increased by an average of 400% since the establishment of cooperative research protocols, the synthetic reported. Problems that had remained unsolved for millennia have been resolved within months when approached by multi-species research teams. The sharing of different cognitive approaches has created unprecedented innovation in every field of study. Elena, now serving as Supreme Coordinator of Galactic Defense, had overseen the transformation of military doctrine throughout the galaxy. The Liberation Fleet had evolved into something that had never existed before, a truly defensive organization dedicated to protecting freedom rather than conquering territory. We maintain 12,000 ships at strategic points throughout the galaxy, she reported to the Council. Not to project power or enforce political will, but to ensure that no species ever again faces the choice between submission and extinction. The age of conquest is over. Young David Kim, whose technical expertise had been crucial to coordinating operations across galactic distances, had become the primary architect of the communication and coordination systems that made galactic democracy possible. His testimony revealed the most remarkable aspect of their achievement. We now have real-time democratic participation from over 40,000 species across the galaxy, he explained. Every major decision is made with input from all affected parties. Conflicts are resolved through mediation rather than warfare. For the first time in galactic history, intelligence itself has become the primary tool for solving problems instead of force or coercion. But perhaps the most significant change was represented by Commander Zex Thule himself, who had requested permission to address the Council on behalf of the Velnari people. My species spent 10,000 years believing that intelligence was something to be collected, cataloged, and controlled, he said, his chromatophores displaying patterns that translated as deep humility. We saw consciousness as a curiosity rather than recognizing its true nature as the most powerful force in the universe. Humanity has taught us, and through us the galaxy, that intelligence achieves its greatest potential when it is free to choose its own path and cooperate with other forms of consciousness. The restitution programs that the Velnari had been conducting under Liberation Alliance supervision had resulted in the reunification of millions of separated beings with their homeworlds. Entire species that had been on the verge of extinction had been restored to viability. Technologies that had been hoarded by the collectors were now freely shared throughout the galaxy. But the most profound change was less tangible and more important than any specific achievement. The galaxy had learned something that humanity had tried to teach through example rather than force, that cooperation was not just more ethical than domination, it was more effective. Sarah's final address to the Galactic Council summarized what they had learned during the 3 years since the liberation began. We discovered something remarkable about consciousness itself, she said. Intelligence is not a finite resource that must be hoarded or controlled. It is a generative force that becomes more powerful when it is free to interact with other forms of intelligence. The Velnari treated consciousness as a collection of separate objects. We have learned to see it as a network of infinite potential. The data supported her conclusion. Scientific advancement, artistic achievement, and technological innovation across the galaxy had accelerated beyond all previous rates. Problems that had seemed insurmountable when approached by individual species became manageable when addressed by cooperative interspecies teams. More importantly, the galaxy had learned to see diversity of thought and approach as a strength rather than a threat. The radical differences between species that had once been sources of conflict became advantages when properly coordinated toward common goals. Elena's closing statement to the Council captured the transformation that had occurred, not just in human understanding, but in galactic consciousness itself. 3 years ago, humanity was captured and caged because we were considered an interesting curiosity. Today, we stand as proof that intelligence, when it is free to choose cooperation over competition, can accomplish anything. We have not conquered the galaxy. We have not imposed human values or human government on other species. We have simply demonstrated that freedom and cooperation are more powerful than any weapon or any empire. As the Council session concluded and representatives from 40,000 species returned to their homeworlds, the galaxy began adjusting to a new reality. For the first time in recorded history, intelligent life was free to develop according to its own nature rather than the demands of dominant powers. The humans who had started as prisoners in a collection facility found themselves serving as coordinators, mediators, and teachers in a galactic civilization that had learned to value consciousness itself as its most precious resource. But perhaps most remarkably, they had accomplished this transformation without imposing human culture or human government on anyone. Instead, they had shared humanity's greatest discovery, that intelligence achieves its highest potential when it is free to cooperate with other forms of intelligence in pursuit of common goals. The galaxy had learned what it meant to cage humanity, and in learning that lesson, it had discovered something far more important: what it meant to set consciousness itself free. From a small blue world on the edge of an unremarkable solar system, a species that had once struggled to cooperate among its own kind had taught the galaxy that cooperation between radically different forms of intelligence was not just possible, but inevitable once consciousness recognized its own unlimited potential. The age of collection had ended. The age of collaboration had begun.